Hi, Ian. Thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. So, July has been Sustainability Month for Secret Spaces. So we've been doing a lot of around that with blogs, and I'm currently working on a webinar that's happening next week. So, and as a consequence of that, I know we had a conversation recently about your Go Climate Positive accreditation, which I think is really interesting. And so I'd love to hear more about it, and just kind of how you've set it up and why you've done it, and what companies can get out of working with you through the accreditation process.
Sure. So, well, I really wanted to give business owners the opportunity to engage positively with the drive to reduce our impact on the climate. And traditionally, it's not been a very easy subject, I think, for small and medium businesses to get to grips with, because it's actually quite a complex calculation, and it takes a bit of time to understand how to do it, and takes a lot of resource, which time's always short in smaller businesses. So I really wanted to give business owners that opportunity to properly engage with it, and not just randomly do stuff, but actually understand really what is the climate impact of their business, and where are the biggest impacts, and so how can they prioritise their activities so they know they're doing the most important things first. And secondly, how can they communicate that effectively to their customers? Because that's a really important thing too. There's been a real, last couple of years especially, but I think really accelerated by recent events. There's a real groundswell now from people who want to do the right thing, and want to do the right thing not just in their own actions, but also in the product and services they're buying.
Yes, and I know myself through the research that I've been doing for the webinar that I'm co-hosting next week, that many larger organisations will push the smaller organisations that they're buying products and services from, and really want to be comfortable that they have got sustainability credentials and are really looking at their environmental impacts and so forth, which is great to hear that big business is driving this. But then it says, as a smaller business, you need to make sure that you can not just tick those boxes, but are proactively doing something, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the other end. Consumers want to buy green, and as you say, businesses want to buy green, but how do you do that in a realistic way, but also that's manageable way? So that's really the problem I was trying to solve here. And so there's a few elements to it. The first thing is to actually be able to calculate your carbon footprint accurately, and there's a well-established method to do it, but it is complex. So it's probably more time consuming than a small business owner can do themselves. So that's where we come in, and we help do that calculation for the businesses. And then it's really important to be able to set sensible targets that are meaningful, in that they are actually in line with climate science, but at the same time are achievable. And
presumably measurable, right? That's
exactly. Exactly. So rather than just do stuff, we can actually say, yeah, if we're going to do this activity here, we know how much carbon it's actually going to save, and it's actually going to take us, down the route we need to go, fast enough, but it's also manageable.
So my understanding from our conversation was that there's 3 stages to how you take a company through this, and you start by proactively measuring their current carbon footprint, which I imagine is quite an interesting process for any business to go through. But is it also quite detailed?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So we have around about just over 50 questions that we asked, really, to delve into all of the activities that they're doing, to understand which of those are creating carbon emissions. And then we produce quite a detailed report, so you can see exactly where your emissions are coming from.
So what type of things does it measure? What type of things are on the report? What do you look at? And does it differ by business, or is it always the same?
The questions are all the same, but the answers are wildly different.
Right.
So it ranges from the obvious, Are you using gas or oil for your heating? What electricity are you buying? But also perhaps some of the less obvious things like the products and services you buy. All have actually created carbon to manufacture them and ship them to you. The waste that you create actually has a carbon footprint for processing it. With some companies, if they're selling products and those products use, say, electricity, then there's actually carbon emissions created all the way through their life. It might be include your employees' commute into work, which is another thing that I often think about, but that's a part of your footprint. So it really gets quite comprehensive. But that also means there's lots of targets to go out to reduce your footprint to.
And so once you've got that report, you then work with an organisation to agree the steps that they need to take to reduce their carbon footprint to the point where they are carbon neutral. Is that right?
Well, that's what we'd like to do.
Right.
The first step is to set targets both long and short term, because it's unlikely we're going to be able to reduce to zero immediately. So we help them set what's called a science-based target, which means it's in line with the latest climate science, so that we know we're doing enough. Ideally, that would be 5, 10, 15 years in the future, but as far ahead as the business can reasonably manage. But then also some sensible actions to do over the next year. The idea being you measure your carbon footprint for the year, set some actions, do some work, reduce it, measure it again at the end of the year, and hopefully see that you come down, and you get into an annual cycle. And that annual cycle is really our first level of certification, we call carbon footprint. And it's really demonstrating you're measuring it, and you're committed to reducing it, and you're on that cycle of doing that. Carbon neutral, you mentioned, is very often businesses who come to me say, we want to go carbon neutral. What that means is you're saving as much carbon as you're creating.
Right.
Now, it's really, ideally you do that by reducing to zero, but that will take time. So often the way in which we deal with that in the meantime is through carbon offsetting, which is probably something you've heard of, something most people have heard of. The idea behind that is that you invest in a project that saves carbon somewhere else to the same level of the carbon that you're producing. And so overall, the amount of carbon that's going into the atmosphere is neutral. And so
would I be right, and maybe I'm wrong, that is that sort of somebody planting trees somewhere? Is that kind of what those offset?
It can be. There are a variety of projects that you can invest in. Sometimes it's tree planting. One of the projects we invest in provides ceramic water filters to communities in developing communities where traditionally they have to boil water to purify it. Okay. But if they can pass it through one of these ceramic filters, it means they don't need to burn, so they're not creating those emissions. They also don't have to collect firewood, and often because they're burning inside domestic homes, that actually creates respiratory and ocular problems too. So there's often a lot of social benefits in these projects as well as the climate benefits.
That's amazing. That is amazing. So not just about planting trees then, which is great. It's great that there's a diverse way of what those credits actually come from. Yeah. And what's the third stage? What's the kind of gold standard that you would want to get with?
Yeah, it's where I think it gets really exciting actually. We call it climate positive. And what we mean is here we're actually saving more carbon than we're producing. But the way in which we work it is we really want to help businesses to look at their value chain and actually help either their suppliers to reduce their emissions or help their customers to reduce emissions. Right. Because if we do that, then actually the positive impact you're having is massively multiplied. And so if your supplier reduces their emissions, not only do you reduce your emissions, but all of their customers do too. And if your products and services can produce fewer emissions, then every single one of your customers does. And that raises the prospect that you can actually save more than you're producing by the impacts that you're having outside of your organisation. And that is really what we're trying to achieve here, so that we can actually accelerate the drive to get to net zero overall by 2050, which is the challenge that we've got to rise to.
So in working through this process, an organisation would be helping the country overall reach its
Absolutely.
carbon neutral position in 2050, did you say?
Yeah.
Right, which seems a long way off, but I guess if we don't start now, we're just not going to get there.
Well, the point is, to get there, we need to halve the emissions that we're creating in the next 10 years. So
right, okay.
that's, put it like that. And yes, it's doable, but it means we do really need to start now and go at it with some vigor.
And so obviously it's very obvious kind of how this process helps from a climate point of view. From the conversations that you have with businesses that you're already working with, do they see a kind of benefit in business in terms of, more people buying their products? So that does it help from that point of view as well?
Yeah, there's no doubt that, the business owners that are coming in, they see both sides. They definitely want to help the planet, but they also see that it needs to have a business benefit.
Sure.
And recent surveys show that around about 3/4 of consumers want to buy from businesses that take the environment seriously and would change their buying habits to do it. So actually providing the certification that they can put on their website using their marketing communications, and providing the transparency that says not only do we have the certificate, but we also produce a web page where we publish this is what your footprint is, and also this is what you've committed to do to reduce it. So that provides that credibility that when customers come in and say, well, okay, are you really doing it? Then we've got the backup there. So it's definitely, there's a hard financial business benefit too, I think.
Right. And obviously, we've all stopped moving around a lot in the last few months out of necessity. So have the last 3 months had any direct positive impact, or is it too soon to say from a carbon perspective?
Oh, it definitely will have, because although we tend to forget that our online digital lives have a carbon footprint, they certainly do. Compared to all the driving around that people normally do, it's much, much less. And you can actually see, I think we've seen some of the physical manifestations of that. So we've seen, much, much clearer air. And a lot of people I speak to actually recognize that themselves, and they can feel the benefit as they're walking on the street, that their breathing's better, that the air's clearer. And we've seen, great images from Venice where people have actually seen the bottom of the canal for the first time in decades. So obviously, it's not a good situation, and it's hard to talk about silver linings because a lot of people have sadly lost their lives. But there's no doubt that I think it's helped people really understand the impact of our behaviour on what the impact that really does have on the environment. And therefore, I'm kind of hopeful that will help to accelerate people's move in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I know one of the things you mentioned earlier was that you measure the carbon footprint of people travelling to work. Well, we've all been working from home, so that, I guess, quite simply must have had an impact in that, people are not jumping in a car and doing an hour-long commute, sitting in traffic probably for 45 minutes of that hour. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And as you say, I do, and part of the drive for us around looking at sustainability over the course of July was appreciating just how people have become more aware of nature, the benefits of nature, and as you pointed out, our impact, and actually how quickly, actually, I think back at the beginning that people began to appreciate that actually if you step outside, you can tell the difference for there being no cars on the road.
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that information, Ian. And, I think, looking at the fact that you've got a structure that gives the business an accreditation, which I think, from a consumer point of view will be important, and the visibility that the information on your website gives, so that actually somebody can go and see specifically what a business is doing, I think will be very helpful. So yeah, I think it's a great initiative. So, and thank you for sharing the information about it.
Fabulous. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Nice to talk to you.
Bye-bye.